you all, Carol Johnson, a lady whose name I heard when I was a student in Cambridge, and whose firm, Carroll R. Johnson and Associates, is about to celebrate, I believe it's its 23rd anniversary, which I think is rather a remarkable track record, and a tribute both to her abilities and what would I call it, perseverance in the type of economies that we have had over the last 20 years. Carol received her Bachelor of Arts from Wellesley College in 1951 and a Master in Landscape Architecture from Harvard in 1957. Shortly after, she opened her own practice and has done work in such areas as campus planning, environmental impact assessment, and her personal love, if I'm not mistaken, urban design. I think at this point I'll be quiet, other than to say that she also has teaching experience at Harvard from 1966 to 1973 and has been a member of the Loeb Fellowship Advisory Council at Harvard. Carol? I better check.
Thank you. I have a lot of buttons, switches, and things here. Before I turn on the slides, I'll try to describe what I hope to do with my slide presentation tonight. This will be a little bit different from the lectures that I typically give, and perhaps the ones that you typically see, full of a lot of magnificent finished projects. I want to do something a bit different. I want to focus on one project. It's not built, but it's being built. And that project began in my office just 1 year ago. What I hope to do is show you this project and some other possible design approaches, because I've had the feeling, judging from folks who come to work for us, who are just from out of school, that very often they have not had the opportunity to understand the rather large breadth of possibilities, design possibilities, the notion that there may be several good approaches to a design, not one real solution and some others less good, but actually several good design solutions to one problem is something that seems to be a little difficult for some of the folks who come to work for us who've just gotten out of school. So I think that the project will illustrate that. So it may seem odd to you to think of sort of broad scale understanding of design perception viewed from simply one project, but I think you'll see what I mean as I explore this particular project and the ways we approached it and the ways others did. And from my own point of view, I've been suggesting, and perhaps some of the schools do already do this, but I do think that it would be valuable for students who, instead of pursuing to achieve their own solution to a design problem, if they could be encouraged to take that design problem and actually produce several solutions all the way through the presentation stage, because I think that that's a great learning experience, and we do that in our office work. So what I'm going to bring to you tonight is the sort of nuts and bolts of how an office works, and I'll show you some of the drawings that the young people just out of school do for our office, which are presented to various professional reviews and boards. Now I have the slides, and the project that I'm going to talk about tonight is the John Marshall Place Park in Washington, D.C. Now, John Marshall Place Park is part of a much larger project, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation. It was begun after President Kennedy was elected and inaugurated. He paraded, as all presidents do, from the Capitol, which is there, and paraded down, I guess the arrow should go this way, down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. Pennsylvania Avenue then was a rather derelict street, and Kennedy suggested that the Main Street of America should be improved, and the corporation was founded. There are technical staff members in Washington, and there are also particular consultants to the corporation. In landscape architecture, the consultants are Sasaki Associates. In engineering, it's Tibbetts Abbott McCarthy Stratton. The contracting firm is Gilbane, and the lighting designer is Ray Gerald. I'm pointing that out to you so that you can see how our design was critiqued by these consultants, which I'll show you in the slides later. The studies that the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation did in developing the master design for the avenue related to the original design by L'Enfant, which you see on the left. The L'Enfant design for Washington was developed using a grid pattern and the diagonal avenues connecting the major nodes. Some of the views and vistas that you see in the slide on the left, as envisioned by L'Enfant, have been destroyed. This study by the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation in the middle shows some of the things that have happened. You can read their notes. The changes where the Federal Triangle has interrupted one of the vistas. The Washington Monument, of course, was not quite on the axis that L'Enfant had planned. The area that we'll get into in more detail is noted there in red. That's our site for the John Marshall Place Park. The Capitol, again, is there. The mall, which extends to the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial is there. The White House is on a side axis off the main axis, and that's there, and it has a rather nice sort of soft edge planting characteristic, whereas the mall has the more rigorous straight line organization. We were sensitive to both the mall and the side axis in developing our small parcel here, which is another side axis off the mall connecting to the old City Hall. Now, just to review that, you have here the map of Washington, the Capitol here, there's the mall, the Washington Monument. Here's the axis running to the White House. And here is our site off of Pennsylvania Avenue, the John Marshall Place Park, which focuses on the old City Hall here. In developing our design for this area, we were sensitive to the mall, the main organization of the main axis, the Washington Monument, and the side axis to the White House, which has the softer, more romantic planting. But as I'll show you, a view from the center of the space does focus on the open vista to the White House. Now, we do have two projects by the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation which have been completed. The model here shows the White House, Pennsylvania Avenue extending down toward the Treasury, which actually interrupts the connection to the White House that was originally planned. At that end of the avenue, two projects are completed. The Western Plaza, which is here, and Pershing Plaza. The Western Plaza, many of you may have seen photographs of. It's by Venturi and Rausch, the architects from Philadelphia. What it is, of course, is a very large paved plaza, which is the L'Enfant plan, showing the White House, the Ellipse, the main mall, the Capitol, and Pennsylvania Avenue here. The project, you can get all sorts of fantastic sensations of scale when you're standing there, as these folks are. You can stand at this point, which is about where I was taking this photograph. You can look along the avenue, continue to look along the avenue, and be in two scales at once and see the Capitol more or less as L'Enfant planned. Now, I perhaps might not have designed this project exactly as it is. There are folks who are rather critical. It's glaring in the summer. There are no trees. However, I love this project, and I don't know that every plaza has to have trees. To me, it's a great success, but not every plaza has to be the same. The plaza does have areas where it does seem rather bleak and cold in the winter and without the sort of richness that we might have provided there. However, the other project, which is immediately adjacent to this one, which is Pershing Plaza, has all sorts of richness. Now, this project is by the landscape architect Friedberg, and I'm sorry I don't have much better photographs of it. It's a splendid project. These photographs were taken before the completion. So there's all this sort of campfire furniture, which was replaced with final furniture. And the pool, which you see here, was filled with water, and there's a waterfall which comes off there. In the winter, it's frozen for skating, and you can rent skates there. There's a little kiosk where you can buy beer, which is over a little bit to the right of this photograph. And in general, again, it's a very different project, but I think it's an absolutely terrific landscape project. Again, there are the critics of this project, just as the other one, although they're totally different. The critics of this project certainly feel that it's rich enough. It couldn't be much richer. They feel that it doesn't quite fit into downtown Washington. And they may have a point. The project is sunken, and there are berms or steps down into it, so that the face that it presents to the Washington that we know of, the L'Enfant Washington, is not the face that you see here. And I do think that it's a great amenity, and it's a very popular success in Washington. So we have a view here that shows the plan in '64, and we have many things that have changed since that time. Here's the area that I just showed you photographs of. The Western Plaza is there, and the Pershing Plaza is there. There's Treasury, and there's the White House. So this conception of 1964 was changed totally. The traffic planning was changed, and this road continued through, and we have the two projects rather than this single one. At that time in '64, the Mellon Gallery here was opposite a green space. There was no plan at that time, at least they didn't show it here, for the east wing of the National Gallery, the paved project. Our site, which you see here, was planned at that time to be a street with trees on either side. C Street, which is there, was going to be closed. Now, the plan in the middle is more or less the current plan, although even it has changed. Here's the area where the Western Plaza and the Pershing Plaza have been built, and as you see, this is still not what I've showed you in the earlier slides. Now, what's happened down here? Well, there's the East Wing, totally different from what they thought of in '64. The East Wing has the sort of fish scale pattern granite plaza connecting it to the Mellon Gallery. There's a very nice fountain. There are groves of magnolia trees, which are actually, I believe, on top of a lower level space. The plan for the avenue has been developed. Sasaki Associates, the consultant landscape architect to the entire project, have developed the theme of a double row of willow oaks on each side and an 8x8 square paver laid at 45 degrees to the avenue. I've always been confused, and I simply haven't thought to ask why they chose the 45-degree angle, because as everyone knows, the angles in Washington are usually the 30-60. Our site here is still about the same. They've planned for a very large development there, which hasn't occurred. The existing building, the City Hall, is there. The slide at the right is the L'Enfant plan, just to set you back into the context of the grid and the angled avenues. Now I'm going to go closer to our site, which is there, John Marshall Place Park. The slide there shows you the East Wing under construction. This is really a staging area. They diverted the street around it, and once the museum was finished, the road went straight through and they built that plaza that I mentioned. And here is our site here. It's interesting to note this building, which has since been torn down, had an entrance there. Now, that particular site has now been, they've negotiated with the Canadian government, and that parcel has been taken by the Canadians, and it will be the new Canadian Chancellery. And one of the many challenges we had in designing the park, which will fit into this area because there'll be a new setback line, was we were trying to imagine what the Canadian architect would want to do with his site so that we could design this park to be most sympathetic not only to the existing building and to the traffic through, but also to the future building there. The diagram in the center was done by a young lady. She had been out of school about 8 or 9 months. She had an undergraduate degree from Louisiana and a graduate degree in landscape architecture from Harvard. Her graphics improves and continues to improve, but she didn't make too bad a start here. This shows you the East Wing, Pennsylvania Avenue with its heavy traffic, the vista to the old City Hall here, C Street with lighter traffic, and our site there, which really should be pulled in together with this whole space. However, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation only had control of this space, and although I started out always thinking of designing it that way, they quickly stopped me and said, you know, don't be absurd, we'll never be able to do this, you'd better design in there, and so I did. I'll take you on a little tour of the site. The view on the left, I'm in our site looking toward the Capitol, and then I'm in our site and looking toward this building. Again, the view across the site from the street, looking in the direction of the Capitol, looking on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue toward the site. You can see this is, in fact, shown there as an empty lot. That's where the Canadians will go. And on the right-hand side over there is this existing courthouse. The old City Hall is up at the end of the street. there's a view that's of importance. We're looking up our site to the old City Hall. Here it is without the leaves on the trees. Here it is with the leaves on the trees. Now, if one stands looking down from the old City Hall, past the statue of Lincoln, down toward the mall, you'll see these views. The east wing of the National Gallery is there. The site that we've been given to work on is there. Just to look back, the Canadian site is here. Our site is in there. There's the City Hall that I just showed you views from. And this is a view from the Canadian site looking directly across at the existing courthouse. Now, in studying this site, we had first to cope with a sort of traffic problem. The driveway from the courthouse had to be maintained into Pennsylvania Avenue in some manner. The Canadians had a right-of-way so that the ambassador could gain access to the new chancellery from Pennsylvania Avenue. But there seemed to be three ways of doing it. Scheme one, we liked very much. It got the courthouse traffic out here and the Canadians' right-of-way there, and our park space could come all the way out to the avenue. We liked that one a lot. This one, we felt that the park was going to be chopped by this driveway. There'd be a lot of traffic coming out right near the Canadians because a lot of people park here to go to the courthouse. The park seems sort of separated from the avenue and from where a lot of the people are. This one perhaps is the most conscious of where traffic comes. Traffic does come out there, and this more or less lines up with it. Again, it seems to place a great importance on traffic, and we wondered whether that was really absolutely necessary. So the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation traffic engineer reviewed these, and I'm quite sure whether he just happens to be a rather sympathetic fellow, or whether he really did feel that the traffic needs were served by this one. I had the feeling that he was partly sympathetic, but in any case, he agreed that although this put two vehicular access points on the avenue, which normally any traffic engineer will say, no, make that into one connection, he said that as long as we had this a one-way loop out and this access one-way in, he felt there was no problem in the traffic plan pursuing this one. And we felt absolutely delighted because in my thinking, I wanted to make the park as important as possible, and the Scheme 1 method seemed to do that for us. Now I'm going to show you how we began just a year ago. We didn't have much time. It had to start fast and move fast. And the young lady in the office prepared this diagram, which I'll leave for your reference, and show you some of the quick studies that I did one Sunday in order to get us off the ground. I was concerned about the cross-access that you find in your main campus space here at Ball State, and you find it at Harvard Yard and various other places. And so I wanted to do one study where we responded to that. Now, one thing that we had to recognize was what were the Canadians going to want? And one thing we knew is that they wanted this right-of-way. They wanted to go from the right-of-way into the chancellery. Now, when I got started with looking at the site, I got a little bit hung up on this cross-axis from the courthouse, and I'd been looking at the L'Enfant plan and the sort of Baroque planning, and I thought, well, of course, we will want to do something like that. Whatever else we do, whether we recognize that sort of traffic pattern, whether we have a panel of grass with planting or however, we will probably want to do something like that. Now, in fact, there are some problems, some practical problems, and other problems as well. The problem that is of importance as far as the gradient is concerned, the site slopes about 12 feet from end to end. Now there's considerably greater distance to negotiate the slope up to this point from here to here, and it can be done with a reasonable handicapped ramp. On this side, it's a very short distance, and it's very, very steep if you're going to get up to an equal elevation. Well, there's not very much point in developing this grand Baroque thing with this cross-axis if this thing is down in a hole. So in order to get this up to that, you have a very, very steep place here, and it really is somewhat impractical. So the other thing that concerned me was that I suspected that possibly the Canadians will want to have an entrance here, as the old building did, because there's a lovely vista up to the Capitol. And also, I think they probably just might want to have access from the avenue. But if you have a major space here for access, then it's really virtually impossible to get up to this elevation opposite that one. And then the other thing that occurred to us as we discussed the whole aspect of the Canadian Chancellery, this sort of cross-axis suggests a very strong relationship between these two buildings, when in fact there is little or none. This is a courthouse. Judge Sirica has his chambers there. They may come out and enjoy visiting, but there really isn't much relationship. But it took me a while to figure that out. As you can see on this study, I was trying to diminish the strength of it, but I still was working with that on this scheme. Now, the other thing I should try to point out is that in all of these studies, I'm trying to see ways of giving a soft, sort of more romantic English planting expression, but at the same time trying to show some sort of structure and axial treatment through the space. There were plans, I thought, for cutting off the axis here with trees, and at some places I put those trees back into the to the park space. In this case, I was going to have sort of steps up that would hold this grove of trees. These studies show, again, this connection, other ways of treating the sides with ramps and a sort of garden panel in the center. This particular idea that came to me was that we would have grass terraces that would make the transition from the hard surface areas into the garden, the softer grass areas. We have grass terraces here, but it'd be a paved plaza, grass terrace, and then a garden area. And up here, the same device, a paved terrace with some planting and then grass terraces. The last study that you see here shows some more combinations of those devices. Now, I'll just show you what we did with those. So I developed some of those quick sketches and then hung them up on the wall with my team of experienced and inexperienced people, and we all took pot shots and tried to develop ideas from those ideas. Now, the drawings on the left are the ones you've seen. The drawings on the right were done by the same young lady who was out of school by this time, about 10 months. This study, we were trying to address the cross-circulation problem, we were having a great deal of trouble, and we did for quite some time, in working with the two orientations, the angle and the grid. So that was the first study. You'll see that the studies changed and varied. The study that you see on the right was one where we were trying to have something very soft and the more English romantic tradition with the axis through. We still understood they were going to cut it off here, which we found out later they were not. This has the grass terraces at either end. And you can see what we had done about the access to the Canadians. We assumed that they may want an entrance here. They may have about a 10-foot floor-to-floor relationship. So we went up 10 feet and we got to there, and we assumed that that might be a place where they would want an entrance. If they're going to have an entrance here, unless they work with a half level somehow, they will have to go up to there before they can get their upper entrance. This one is again a development. This grass panel seems awkward and probably would be difficult to maintain. We changed that and had other ways of treating it. This one seems to stress the area here more than it needs to be if you don't have the entrance to the Canadians there, if you move it back to there. And this one made that into a paved plaza, which seemed most practical because there's a lot of use of this area, especially during parades, inaugural parades and things like that. We took these 5 schemes to Washington, and they were pleased. They saw some good beginnings. They got us off the idea that we'd gotten from them that these trees had to be solid all along the avenue. They said not only should we have the access from the old City Hall going through the garden, but in fact it should go all the way through to the avenue. That was a misunderstanding. We thought that they meant to stop it here, but no, they meant to take it all the way through. So that worked well with what we were doing. It was fairly easy to do. So after our trip there, we developed a scheme that was the foundation for the entire design, and you've seen how it emerged from the various ideas in the earlier sketches. The scheme was trying to respond to the axial Baroque treatment of l'enfant and trying to gain the richness and variety of some of the softer sort of English romantic landscape of the White House. We did keep the access open to the old City Hall. We developed what we called the Lower Bosque area, a paved plaza raised up a few steps from Pennsylvania Avenue. We have what we call the Upper Bosque area. There are fountains on either side with groves of trees, and you can sit in either of these paved plazas, or you can go up these grass steps. They're 15 inches high. There are small stairs, but you can sit on them and have lunch there or there and go into this central space, which we call the garden room. Handicapped can go all the way through on ramps on either side and don't need to go up the steps. Handicapped gain access to the middle level, the garden room, either from this side or from this side. So that was our organizing system, and you'll see how we developed that to the final design. Now I'll just run through those so that you see where that came from, the earlier schemes. And that's the 5th scheme. And then I want to point out at the same time, Sasaki Associates, the consultant landscape architects, see the PADC, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, has the individual project designers like Venturi, Rausch, Friedberg, and like my office ourselves. They have as an reviewing group the Sasaki Associates for Landscape and the other consultants I mentioned. The Sasaki people followed the traffic pattern that I said was most responsive to the pattern over here. Now, one can say that their treatment, a very strong axial treatment, is more responsive to the l'enfant planning. It has little problems with the gradient, I think, but generally one can always solve those things once one recognizes them. But they were very, very critical of our approach because they felt that it should be more bilaterally symmetrical, and this is an example of that. And I'm pointing this out to you because I do want you to understand that I think they're quite right. They have valid approach here. I wanted to do it a little differently, but that doesn't mean that theirs isn't quite correct. These are some more of their schemes. Here they have the traffic going all the way through, and they have a sort of vehicular arrival, a very nice sort of formal vehicular plaza with very formal bosques of trees and rows going through. A very strong axial system. This one is another rough sketch, somewhat similar, doesn't take the traffic through, has an upper plaza more like ours, but again, their whole thrust was a little bit different from ours, and I don't think either can be said to be wrong. This one might be one of the best ones. It responds very closely to the vehicular plaza opposite the east wing. You come in and have the same sort of thing, and then a very strong cross-axis and the connection up to the city hall. Well, we presented ours and they presented theirs, and we were encouraged to proceed with our direction of having more green space and some more of the gardenesque quality rather than the vehicular. I did feel that although theirs responded very well to the site, that there really are an awful lot of places for cars, and I wanted, if I could, to provide more garden space for people's relaxation. And the PADC agreed with that and told me to proceed with this scheme. And this is our 30% submission, these drawings here, which was our first formal presentation to the Commission of our design concept. We had the lower bosque that I showed you, the upper bosque with the fountains, and the garden room with the grass terraces connecting down, making the transition from the plaza to the garden, the access on this side and on this side. This is the view from the lower bosque down here, looking toward the City Hall, which you see there. This is the view up at C Street, looking through the upper bosque, the garden room, the lower bosque, down to the mall and Fort McNair in the distance, which you actually can't see. They claim that I had to leave it open to see that, but in fact there was a building built there. These drawings show the sort of detailed feeling for the planting and the development in small-scale areas that we were looking for. We weren't looking for just organized bosques of trees. We were looking for a finer scale, a scale that an individual would respond to within a stronger framework. And I'll show you how we strengthen that as we go. However, when we submitted that, everyone down there seemed to be very pleased, but there were those who were not. There are always those who are not. What I had thought was that the lower bosque area would tie to the upper bosque area by means of some trees and by means of the building facades, and I would keep a broad area of the looser planting for the garden room. And it was thought that we didn't have a strong enough framework to tie the two ends together. That I agreed with as I studied it further, but what troubled me about the design immediately, and no one else seemed very bothered with, I think I just hadn't noticed, was that this lower bosque really hadn't reconciled the problems of the two orientations, the grid and the angle. We have this lower bosque and we have this row of trees, that sort of makes sense. And we have this, well, that sort of makes sense. And then we have this weird thing that goes there, you know, and you don't know why that spacing is that, and you don't know exactly what relationship. These seem to be a row, but there isn't anything there. And in general, it was just, you know, one of those hopeless botches that we all do when we're in a dreadful hurry. The moment the submission was made, I went in for another of my Sundays trying to explore things that I can't get done any other day. And as soon as it was a little quiet, I realized why pay responded the way he did with the East Wing. It's a glorious organizing tool for the kind of geometry that L'Enfant gave to us. And all I did was develop a module using the reciprocal angles, the angle parallel to Pennsylvania Avenue and its reciprocal. And the moment I did that, the whole problem just solved itself, and I had all these lovely little things that I could put our bosque of trees in or benches in or whatever I liked. And I was terribly pleased with my Sunday's work. The thing that I didn't take time to do was draw this drawing. I thought that we should, within the diamond pattern, use the fish scale granite pavers, which Pei had used on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue. And I thought that would be an absolutely dandy thing. I'd have all that nice geometry that Pei used in Pennsylvania Avenue and L'Enfant would recall. But then I would respond to what was on the other side with this paving. What I forgot in my haste was that the Sasaki design for the avenue had this 8x8 square paver at 45 degrees to the avenue. So here I have, this stuff, which is already there and I can't change. And then I have this, which is at a different angle. And then I have these crazy fish scales, and it became, a real garbage salad. And it was just absolutely unacceptable. Although it would have been rather nice in the upper bosque. The fish scale sort of fitted in quite well there. But this business was just not tolerable. So I came up with this version that you see here. There's the 45 with a square paver, and we have these things going through. They should be rather subtle because although they look quite contrasting here, they're actually all the same finish in the final design. At least we have here just two geometries, this, and not the three. Now I want to just go back to the issue that they raised. They weren't so interested in this matter. You can see here, though, what's so interesting when you start working with the diamond pattern and you put your trees in every other diamond or every 3 diamonds, you can get a situation like this where you come down the stairs from the garden room and the trees sort of lead you into the center on either side, or the other thing can happen. And as we were told to widen the vista, it kept changing. And we got to thinking, well, there were all sorts of nice things about having it go this way, that it sort of led you into the space more. Since we didn't seem to have a lot of control, I was pleased that we could find reasons to justify either arrangement. The 55-foot spacing was larger than the trees that were there, but not large enough to satisfy the National Capital Planning Commission. So we took it to 70. Now I'll show you quickly the views as you go through those spaces along that axis. Here's one looking to the City Hall. Here's 2. I should turn this around, looking up. There's 3, 4, 5. Now we're up at the top. Now you could see in that sequence that even at the 50-foot spacing, the view as you move through the park was really, I thought, okay. And I was sort of disappointed as these got wider because I felt that I lost the sense of the bosque in order to get this very wide opening for the vista that they wanted. And my photos showed that one got a very nice vista at the 50-foot spacing, but the National Capital Planning Commission was having none of that. And so although I asked if they would go out there and meet me and we could stand there in the middle of the street and they could see the vista through, but nobody thought that was quite so. So this is the last view here looking at the East Wing and down toward the mall. So we ended up with an even wider spacing, as you can see there. It isn't quite what we were looking for, but it was a great compromise. We even had to agree to change the tree species because they wanted trees that wouldn't grow. I really was looking for more of a canopy there than we'll get right at the start. So having settled on our tree spacing after a great deal of effort, we could turn to the next step. We have now a scheme which has an organization. It has an introduction from the heavy use of Pennsylvania Avenue into a paved plaza at the top which will receive the office workers that are up there in the various court buildings, and this softer area, a little bit set apart, the garden area. And we have our 10 feet grade change that we want to negotiate and enjoy and make the most of, mostly in these grass terraces here. However, we have to solve the ramps, which will gain handicapped access. And so we studied a lot of grades and grading, and we studied these walls, and clearly we didn't want folks walking up and having this tip of the wall sort of nail them at eye level and then emerge as it would with this one. So we constantly fiddled around with the grades and the walls, and of course if we had a wall here, we probably wanted the top of that wall to be the same, and so we pushed and we pulled and we lifted, and we'd take these little notches and put them in and change grades, and we fussed and we fumed with it for quite some time. So we were not only studying the walls, but we were also studying the grading and the sort of ground forming. I thought you might like to see a little bit of how the final ground forming came out. When we were studying the grades in this model, we hadn't really articulated how we could blend the ground form into the walls and have a somewhat more architectonic ground form as the ground approached the granite walls. We had a problem with those walls, which we finally lowered them and built grades up. That wall there we put in because we thought we couldn't get the handicap slope that we wanted. Now you can see what we finally did over in here. We took that jog out, we pushed this over, and we got a space between the grass terrace and the walk that we could grade up, so that we totally eliminated that wall, and that way we could lower this wall. And I think we got rid of all those nasty eye-level problems, and we end up with a rather clear, organized system of forming the ground to meet the grade changes, which are of course much crisper when you come to these grass stairs. And this is the way we graded the bosque areas are pitched to points which respond to the paving pattern. Then the final study in the model here, you can see when we were putting in the planting and we were dealing with these funny and rather difficult grading problems with the walls. That's that walk that you see over there. There were a lot of folks who continued to be very critical of the lack of bilateral symmetry. This walkway there is this walkway. It's a much longer walk than this side, and so many of the people who thought that it should be bilaterally symmetrical, I felt that this would be quite boring, particularly because if you went straight through, you hit the only corner of the east wing, which is not simply glorious to look at. Whereas if you come down here, recognize the courthouse, and then continue through, or of course enter the garden room, it seemed to me to have a lot more, I'm sorry, it was there and through, which is this walk. It seemed to me that was much, much better than going straight through there. This way you come and you see the vista to the mall. So I continued to argue with those who didn't agree. Fortunately, the PIDC seemed to be happy with this sort of design approach. And we studied the planting and related that to the contour studies, and developed the final planting layout with the paving patterns and the grading that you can get a sense of there. We did various bench studies in the bosque areas. None of these are the final one. I think we have a better one. And these studies are again done by some people who were just out of school, out of landscape school with undergraduate degrees, and they're out less than 1 year. We studied the furniture. I wanted to use that heavy metal furniture that's the metal is perforated. It's a sort of mesh, because I really didn't want a volume interrupting the view. I wanted the plants to dominate, and I wanted the chairs to sort of just blend into the plants. So we came up with these combinations of chairs and other furniture. And just to show you some of the final detailing that grew out of that, here's our grass seating steps, the various other details that we had to come up with. Of course, we had to do a great deal of study of granite detailing, how you tie things together, how you develop the lighting plan, various wall sections, of course, the piers, the way those connect, and of course all of the details in developing the final paving plan that is laid out there. Now, before we get into the working drawings and the final construction package, I should point out the art package. As we got our design development that I've shown you how we got the tree spacing and the planting and the sketch design details going, we were asked to go ahead and prepare a proposal for art enrichment. This was something that we had been considering early, and it had been taken out of our contract, I guess, to see how things progressed, and things were progressing well, so they put it back in the contract. I developed two themes for the artwork in the park. One was history and one was humor. And everybody seemed pleased with the themes until I came up with the proposal. And I was absolutely delighted with these marching figures. They were going to be sheet metal, full-size, two-dimensional, and I thought they would simply be magnificent, parading along the edge of the park, along Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, I guess humor is okay someplace, but not on Pennsylvania Avenue. So the idea never got past the first presentation. So I came back to them with this idea, and again, the same sculptor, and I just, love his work. I said, I thought maybe we could have a birdhouse in the garden room area, and it wouldn't be right down in the main avenue near the east wing, and it would fit in, be integrated in the design, and maybe that would be okay. And that one, too, just didn't appeal. The Fine Arts Commission felt that it was a little too cute, and I loved it. But we didn't get that one either. But we did get an art package that I think is going to be quite good, and I'm just disappointed that it might have been, in my point of view, a trifle better. We do have our two fountain areas in the upper bosques, and David Phillips, an artist we've worked with David a number of times in the past on other projects. He did this sketch study for the fountain area. He was going to have water lilies and turtles and fish and a whole lot of bronze creatures swimming around in the fountain area. And that has been approved, and David is getting underway now. David casts his own things in bronze. He has his own foundry. In my searching around, I came across the sundial in John Marshall's own garden in Richmond had been copied. And it's a lovely old brass sundial. This is a Xerox print of the face of it, and tells a little bit about it there. So we placed that in the entrance to the garden room just off the courthouse area. And this sketch was done very, very quickly, too quickly. We didn't realize that we couldn't get all of our text on the side of the pedestal. And there was a weather vane that the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation had, and we located that opposite the sundial at the entrance from the courthouse side into the garden room. The other piece of original art which we kept in the project were these chess players. These are full-size bronze figures. I don't know if you know that in Washington, the folks come out and play chess in the parks at lunchtime. It's a great favorite thing. And so we have in our grass terraces a couple of chess players, these fellows, and they will have a chessboard, a bronze chessboard between them, and we're not sure what the play will be here. It will be something marvelous, I hope, that everyone will go and enjoy looking at, and then they'll be able to go and play chess. We'll have other chessboards around that upper grass terrace area. Well, it was sort of amusing. Everybody in Washington was rather pleased with this notion. The sculptor is Lloyd Lilly, and he's a delightful fellow, and he's ready to do whatever we'd like. Well, the people in Washington said, well, maybe one should be a black and one should be a white. And then someone said, well, maybe one should be a woman. Why don't we have a woman in this? And then someone else said, what about a child? And then the thought was, well, would the black be beating, depending on the play, would the black be the white, the woman be beating the man, and so finally we had to get official notification from Washington that we didn't have to have, I think at this point we still had to have the black and the white when I wrote that text. So word came from Washington that the sculptor is going to be allowed to choose the model and the size, color, shape, and everything else about the sculptural piece. And he's very pleased. He's underway. He's taken off. He teaches at Boston University. He's taken off the spring semester, and he's hard at work in his studio. So we have can I go back? We have the final project here, the final design in its context. We don't know the final project here. Arthur Erickson has just been selected the architect for the Canadian Chancellery. That happened just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Our design is here as it finally came out with the wide vista, the garden room, and the upper vista. This is the original sketch, which is pretty much what we came out with. We will change this sketch and show the diamond pattern of the paving. There's the final design there. The project was submitted at 90% complete last October. We had 3 months to finish our working drawings, do our cross-checking, cross-referencing, and get final approvals. We had a phone call that we should complete in 3 weeks because there were some funding problems in Washington, and if we wanted to get it going, we had to do that. I had some very healthy, hardy, recent graduates working on the job, fortunately, and they worked for unbelievably long hours for those 3 weeks, and the job went for bid. While it was out for bid, we finished the work that we hadn't had time to finish, and the bids came in. The project was under budget. Contract was signed before the first of the year, and all these fiscal horrible things didn't happen. And it is presently under construction. It's due to be complete and dedicated in May of 1983. And I thought that although it doesn't show you a nice finished project, I thought that you might enjoy seeing it in Washington if you should be there in the future. And I also thought that you should get an understanding of the different ways that one can approach one very small landscape project. Thank you. Any questions? Yes. The basic goals were to establish the framework that would relate to the L'Enfant Plan, the axial vistas, and I chose to want to enrich that with various works of art or items of history. And in my search for those items, I found the sundial, and then clearly I had a garden room, and I had a sundial that came from John Marshall's garden, and so then I had the choices of all those places in the garden room where I might put a sundial. Obviously, I looked for a place where I didn't think I need to have a big tree, since a sundial works better if it's in the sun. The weather vane was something that they surprised me with. I really didn't need that weather vane, but they had it, and I searched pretty hard to work that one into it. It wouldn't bother me at all if it disappears, but that was something that was there. The sundial, the sundial, I really felt was so much a part of the garden treatment that I was working with, that when I uncovered its existence, I was very pleased, and I was very pleased they had a copy that was available to us. Does that answer your question? Yes?
Just wondering, who were these people that inhabited the ability to make it? Were they lay people, or were they trained professionals, or what capacity? Any outfit on the commission, who were these people that?
Who didn't like the art? Or the question is, who were the people who turned down the humorous objects of art? Well, I'm afraid that the marching figures, the staff turned down. They felt that it was not going to be something acceptable to folks in Washington. And, I don't understand how everybody down there feels, so that was their decision. The birdhouse we actually did present to the Fine Arts Commission of the United States of America. And they turned it, they said it was cute, and they wondered if we could actually do a real birdhouse, that they could accept that. They couldn't accept the sort of cutesy one. Anything else? Oh, thank you. Oh, yes. Yes, I didn't stress, I have some whole lectures that I just give on process with public agencies, which if I had chosen to deal with that at the level of detail that I did of the design, we would have gone on for some time. We did meet with Fine Arts Commission, National Capital Planning Commission, and the National Park Service, as well as a whole lot of city agencies in Washington. The principal people, besides the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, who were concerned with maintenance, is the National Park Service. The National Park Service is in charge of maintaining the public open space along the avenue. The PADC is developing some private contracting to supplement that. We actually, and I didn't point this out, it isn't a key factor in the design, we had to develop a small building because the Park Service couldn't bring equipment from its enormous maintenance facility at Pershing Plaza and Western Plaza, just up to the other end of the avenue. We had assumed that was more than possible, and they didn't feel it was, so that we designed a building for the storage of their materials. They, however, were very cooperative and helpful. Everything was reviewed with them in detail. There were some planting ideas that I thought, well, there were some points where we simply disagreed, but we tried very hard to accommodate their needs in the design layout. And I think that, you know, there are some things that they were a little hesitant about. The grass terraces, well, you know, they do have equipment so they can handle them. They weren't too interested in having the ivy grow around the base of the trees in the bosques, because they thought they'd have to clip them. And I said, no, you don't clip them. You just let the ivy go out and do its thing. But that sort of terrified them. They said, well, then why do you want the diamond pattern? I said, well, you see, the whole design sort of blends together the walls and the planting and the diamond and the ivy. And they really felt that everything had to be done that way. So we discussed it, and I think, you know, we both moved. And I felt very grateful to them that sometimes I feel that I'm the only one who's moving, but they moved and I moved. Yes? No, the budget for the artwork was really called a sort of enrichment package. It was not a major art commission where you'd have a big regular public competition. It was simply something that I had a tradition of doing in my projects, and they felt that since this was principally a landscape project, they would not make a big art element, and I was assigned the task of selecting artists, which would normally have been selected by the Fine Arts Commission if it were a major, you know, public artwork. So they came to me and said, well, now, you know, what have these other projects cost? Well, unfortunately, I'd gotten quite a lot for not very much money on the other projects. I wasn't smart enough to, you know, triple the figure when I told them about it. So we ended up with really only about 150,000, depending on whether you count the foundation under or not, for those art pieces, the fountains, the chess players, and the sundial. So that it's not, out of a $3.3 million project, it's not a lot. If there were some, you know, formula, it might have been more. But the concern was that if it became too big an element, then we would have to stop and have competition, approval of the competition, approval of the judge, approval of the judge's selection, and that, you know, it just might never be built. And time was, I mean, when you think that I did those first yellow things on, you know, a Sunday just a year ago, and we've been all the way through working drawings, and we have an accepted art package, and the contractor is in the ground, and a lot of the utilities are in. I was down there a week or so ago, and there's a big hole in the ground, but there's a lot of piping, water piping, gas piping, all the utilities that we had to relocate. All that is under construction now. We have shop drawings going through our office, all the granite shop drawings we have in. I think it's really quite remarkable that in 1 year that much happened. If we had tried to go more of the typical route for the art, the thought was that we might be slowed down. That may not be the, you know, that's my excuse. That there isn't more. There probably should have been, and we would like to have had more. Yes. No, we thought about using the willow oaks. The willow oaks are the treatment on the avenue, and we were interested in having a different expression in our project, and I think everyone agreed with that. Even the Sasaki folks, I think, felt that we should use different trees. However, the trees that are stretching up on either side, paralleling the new chancellery and the old courthouse, those trees will be red oaks. They'll have a relationship to the willow oaks. And the trees that we ended up in the upper and lower bosque are the Tilia cordata. I was going to use Zelkova to get more of the canopy, the sort of overhead ceiling effect, and the kind of graciousness of that shape. And the National Capital Planning Commission thought they would spread, and quite rightly they would. And so the compromise was the Tilia. Of course, I'm going to be sure that we select the most spreading, the most gracious, the ones with the nicest shapes. The plant material, by the way, is not my detailed design. The project manager for the job, Marion Presley, did all of the detailed planting design. And sometimes we're so used to working with each other, we don't always discuss every detail, although we try to. And I wasn't even aware until she had come up with this wonderful concept. Everything in it is green and white. It goes all the way through the seasons, but the blossoms are mostly white with just touches here and there of yellow and some other colors, but you won't see a riot of color there. We're quite capable of doing that, but this is a quieter expression of planting design. Okay, thank you.